TomoNews presents Concussions.
Aaron Hernandez's brain had substantial damage. Research conducted by Boston University's CTE Center has revealed that former NFL player Aaron Hernandez's brain tissue had severe damage from sporting injuries. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy is a neurodegenerative brain disease typically found in people who have suffered repeated hits to the head. The repeated blows shake the brain and cause the buildup of tau proteins, which hold together microtubules in the brain cell's transport system. Tau protein buildup can gradually disable neural pathways and cause memory loss, dementia, and ultimately kill brain cells over time. 99% of NFL players included in the study were diagnosed with CTE, while 91% of college football players had the same disease. According to Dr. Ann McKee, a neuropathologist who directs research of chronic traumatic encephalopathy at Boston University, said her research team discovered Hernandez had stage 3 CTE and that they had never seen such severe damage in a brain at his age. Less than a year after signing a $40 million contract in 2012 with the New England Patriots, Hernandez was convicted for the murder of Odin Lloyd in 2013. Hernandez was also involved in a double homicide in 2012. On April 19, 2017, Hernandez hanged himself in a prison cell while serving a life sentence for murder. He was 27 years old. McKee and her team of researchers believe CTE severely impacted Hernandez's decision-making abilities during the events leading up to his death. Hernandez also inherited a genetic profile that may have made him more susceptible to CTE.
Study finds brain disease in 96% of former NFL players tested. Many young athletes dream of playing in the NFL, but what most of them don't take into consideration is the risk of brain disease. A study by the Department of Veteran Affairs and Boston University found that 87 out of 91 former NFL players tested suffered from a brain disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy. CTE is a brain disease that researchers believe is caused by repetitive head trauma. Brain scans can detect signs of CTE, but it can only be confirmed posthumously. The disease causes a protein called tau to form around blood vessels in the frontal lobe. During stage 2, sufferers may experience rage, impulsivity, or depression. Symptoms of stage 3 include confusion and memory loss, as the tau proteins spread to other parts of the brain. Stage 4 is marked by dementia, as nerve cells in the brain die. During the final stages of CTE, the brain withers to roughly half the size of a normal brain. A federal judge has approved a $1 billion settlement between the NFL and thousands of ex-players. The money will go toward medical exams, concussion research, and payment for damages.
How small changes to a football helmet could prevent injuries on the field. Football faces harsh criticism as it's become alarmingly clear that a large number of football players, both professional and those who aren't, suffer from the long-term effects of head traumas that originate on the field. While some argue that the rules of the game and football culture itself need to change, others are experimenting with modifying something relatively more simple: the helmet. A standard football helmet has 2 layers, a hard outer shell and an inner layer of padding that's usually made of foam. The human brain is protected by a layer of fluid within the skull. However, that layer doesn't provide enough protection during sudden or forceful impacts, and that's how concussions happen. A typical helmet has several inches of padding inside that slows the acceleration of a direct hit and weakens the force of an impact. Some companies have experimented with putting another layer of padding outside the helmet that can further weaken the force of a hard impact. But that doesn't help against hits from the side that could rotate a player's head, twisting the person's brainstem. This damages the nerves there. A prototype helmet called 01 has several layers of padding. A malleable outer layer bends inward during direct hits. The layer underneath bends at an angle during rotational hits. Football helmets are not perfect, and it's unlikely they'll ever be able to prevent every type of head injury that could happen on the field. But they've come a long way from here.
Flexible NFL helmet designed to reduce concussions. This NFL season, about 70 players are wearing a new state-of-the-art helmet designed to lower the risk of concussions. The Visus 01 was specifically designed to soften the blows NFL players take to their heads during games. The helmet is made of 4 different protective layers. The outer shell is made from flexible thermoplastic that compresses to absorb shock, then rebounds, much like a car bumper. Next is a layer of more than 500 polymer columns that can twist and move laterally, reducing the impact of rotational acceleration, a major cause of concussions. Underneath that is a hard inner shell that helps prevent skull fractures and brain hemorrhages. Below that, a layer of memory foam provides the player comfort. About half of NFL teams have put in orders for the Vice's helmet. NFL players get to choose their own helmet from an approved NFL list. The league has been looking to address concussions, especially as it has faced increasing scrutiny. Medical experts and players are concerned that repeated concussions increase the likelihood of developing CTE, a degenerative brain disease. Study reveals there is no question football is related to brain disease. Recent research found that 99% of professional NFL football players included in the study were suffering from a brain disease known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy is a neurodegenerative brain disease, typically found in people who have suffered repeated hits to the head. The repeated blows shake the brain and cause the buildup of tau proteins, which hold together microtubules in the brain cell's transport system. Tau protein buildup can gradually disable neural pathways and can cause memory loss, dementia, and ultimately kill brain cells over time. 99% of NFL players included in the study were diagnosed with CTE, while 91% of college football players had the same disease. The NFL acknowledged the connection between CTE and football for the first time in 2016. In 2015, a federal judge approved a $1 billion settlement between the NFL and thousands of former players in a brain damage class action lawsuit.
NFL acknowledges brain disease link. The NFL's health and safety officer acknowledged on March 14th that there is a link between the repeated heavy hits players endure and a devastating chronic brain disease. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, also known as CTE, is a progressive brain disease that develops following repeated head impacts that shake the brain inside the skull. Blows to the head cause tau proteins, which hold together microtubules in the brain cell's transport system to modify and detach from the microtubules. Abnormal tangles of tau proteins accumulate over time, ultimately killing brain cells. The helmets worn by football players cannot protect them from repeated subconcussive hits because the brain inside the skull is still shaken by these hits. Researchers with the Department of Veterans Affairs and Boston University have identified CTE in 90 of the 94 deceased former NFL players they have examined.
Scientists may be able to diagnose CTE in players before death. Researchers may have found a way to diagnose CTE in football players while they are still alive. CTE is a progressive brain disease caused by repeated trauma to the head. It usually shows up years after taking repeated blows. Currently, CTE can only be diagnosed through an autopsy. Researchers at Boston University wanted to look for other markers and found people with CTE had elevated levels of the protein CLL11 in both spinal fluid and blood around the brain. Researchers believe the CLL11 protein helps the smallest blood vessels in the brain transport oxygen. Higher levels of CLL11 could mean these blood vessels are leaking, which may lead to CTE symptoms. The team at Boston University is now working with a biotech company to develop a blood test to detect CLL11 and diagnose living players. More research still needs to be conducted on the CLL11 protein to confirm it isn't linked with other kinds of neurodegenerative diseases. There's no cure for CTE, but early diagnosis could give players a chance to mitigate the disease, aka retire. FDA approves blood test for concussions. Good news for those who get concussions. Sort of. The FDA approved a blood test to help diagnose concussions. The Brain Trauma Indicator test looks for two biomarker proteins, UCHL1 and GFAP, which are released upon injury to the brain into the blood. Elevated protein levels can be detected within 15 to 20 minutes of injury. The test can be administered within 12 hours of injury and takes 3 to 4 hours for results. Parents are currently diagnosed based on a combination of symptoms and imaging. CT scans can be problematic in that they don't always detect concussion, have 200 times the radiation of a chest X-ray, and are expensive. A CT scan can cost anywhere from $800 to $1,500 US, compared to the new test, which costs $150. By using a new blood test, the FDA estimates imaging scans can be reduced by at least a third in patients who are suspected of having a concussion.